Okay, now, so we opted to rather separate the second-hand good specifically entailing goods that are movable, separating that from fixed property, because we don't want to throw people off. We've given a good instance in which you have to interact with the information given to you in terms of the questions that we're basically trying to figure out the position as to whether we'd be leaving actual VAT or notional input VAT, and we spoke about the position of the seller, or rather the status of the seller, will likely determine the outcome of where we stand in terms of having to claim a particular kind of an input VAT so far as the buyer is concerned. So now, when we're dealing with fixed property, we're standing the value of supply, which will really be based on applying the normal principles. But the question that we really need to pay particular attention to is the one where we basically have to figure out the time of supply. And the time of supply would be when registration of the transfer is actually made, or when actual payment is actually made as well. So between these two differences, the earlier of the two would be deemed to be the actual time of supply. And while we likely link fixed property to have its own unique set of rules, is that it's a fine line between your VAT and your actual transfer duties as well. So with fixed property, is that if you are not paying VAT, you are likely going to have to pay transfer duties. That's how transfer duties arise. If you're basically dealing with a property dealer, and you yourself are a property dealer, and you're selling and you're actually buying a property which is second-hand in nature, you'd be charging normal VAT, as we elaborated with the former demonstration that we had put forth so far as the second-hand good was concerned, in trying to say to you that the actual position of the seller will likely determine the position of the actual buyer in what he could likely be charging as whether actual VAT or notional input VAT, because the underlying asset would also determine as to what kind of VAT we could likely get into. So if you're dealing with a property dealer, just as we had a similar situation in that instance, where there was a second-hand asset being disposed of by somebody who's a VAT vendor to a VAT vendor, in that instance we went on to say that there would be normal VAT over and above the fact that we're dealing with a second-hand good. However, we're dealing with two VAT vendors. In that notion, it goes to say that we would be compelled to actually claim actual VAT. Whereas if we did not have an actual VAT vendor being the seller, and we on the one side were actually the VAT vendors, in that instance we'd likely be claiming notional input VAT, because there was no VAT initially being charged over to us, because the vendor was not a VAT vendor in any case. In that instance, we're able to prove that we would be legitimate enough to actually claim notional input VAT, So now the discussion comes into a fine print with transfer duty. With transfer duty now, if the VAT vendor on the one end is not a VAT vendor, and you on the one end, you're a VAT vendor, and is basically disposing of a second-hand fixed property, you know, what are the implications at that scenario? We have a non-vet vendor, we're a vet vendor, we've got a second-hand good, basically. So if this gentleman is now selling us an item which does not have vet consequences, that means that we will be paying transfer duties, because transfer duties is basically the responsibility of the buyer, you know. So it's almost like it's an output VAT to us. However, we can still claim input VAT based on the circumstances that would likely be arising, you know. So that input VAT would be similar to notional input, because the underlying asset is a second-hand good from a non-vendor, where we are now paying transfer duties and will likely be claiming back a VAT which is very similar to notional input VAT in that instance. So you left transfer duties as one portion of one form of payment from our buyer's perspective, which is outflow to us. And on the one end,